Jesus told this parable, a story for listeners to interpret. It is found only in Luke's Gospel, but gets at the heart of Jesus' message of caring for those who are lost. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father,
"Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me."
So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in irresponsible living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout the country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said,
"How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough to eat and to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.'
So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him,
'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.'
But the father said to the slaves,
'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Then get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Let us celebrate.'
Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The servant told him,
'This party, is that for the son of his? My father is killing the fatted calf because he has come back safe and sound.'
Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father,
'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes? You killed the fatted calf for him.'
Then the father said to him,
'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and he's been found.'"
Here ends the reading from Luke.
It's a very familiar parable that Jesus taught. It is at the heart of Luke's gospel, the very center of it, if you read through. It's almost unanimously considered to be an authentic teaching of Jesus. We know the story pretty well if you've been around church much. I want you to notice a few things this morning. I want you to notice that that older brother kept saying, "This son of yours," as if he had no relation to him whatsoever. And the father keeps saying, "This brother of yours," wanting to remind him that they have a relationship and that relationships amongst brothers and sisters matter greatly. Notice that the father reminded that older son, "I am withholding nothing from you. I never have. All that I have is yours." But this brother that was gone, well, we found him. I thought he was dead. Of course we have to celebrate. Now, in talking to him, the father is showing care and compassion. He actually is showing unconditional love for both of his sons, each of whom have wronged them in a slightly different way. The youngest son clearly has shamed his father, treated him like he was dead, taken his inheritance and run off and squandered it. But the oldest son is whining. Here he's had a perfectly good life. We know he hasn't been treated like a slave. He's been loved and treated fairly the entire time. Yet he is jealous of his brother. He is being selfish, and he's showing no care for anyone else. So there's something wrong in the behavior of both brothers. But here's what I want you to notice, and this is the nonviolent nugget from this story. The father is angry with neither of them. Neither of them is judged by him, and neither son is punished. Instead, he actually reaches out for them. He goes to each of them with love and acceptance and compassion and actually a message of joy. And all he really wants is for them, perhaps, to feel the same about each other. Don't you kind of wonder what happens next? What happens between those brothers if you continued the story? Do they meet? Do they talk? Do they work it out? Do they tussle a little bit and come to some understandings about their differences? What could they learn from each other with one having left home? Because you see, even though he squandered his fortune and behaved very badly, that younger brother comes back a changed person. And the older brother who has stayed at home, well, his world is really very small, and he's behaving quite selfishly. You could argue there's something to be learned by leaving home. Most of us have left home in one way or another, literally and metaphorically, perhaps many times in our lives. Some of us have made new homes. Some of us have returned to homes of origin. Some of us continue to wander, making home momentarily wherever we are. Some maybe even have left home and haven't really left at all, still being stuck in what they first knew, first were taught, and that's the way the world works. I want to say that I think the smaller your worldview, the less you let yourself leave home, the harder it is to love those who are different, to love without judgment, to love without being self-righteous. Let me tell you another story, a more recent story of a prodigal who returns. There was once a woman who took it upon herself to refinance the home her parents had helped her buy so that she could set aside some money and visit a far-off land. A land where there were many religious voices, mingled and maneuvered and managed somehow to live side by side. A land where the stuff of religion and spirituality was seen everywhere, marking doorways, on people's foreheads, in the fronts of cars and buses and trucks, in the temples and churches and mosques and shrines that rose up everywhere, even in the tiniest of villages. Yes, there would be Christians there, but not very many, for the population of Christians was a mere 3%. What would it be like, she wondered, to be in a place where Christianity was not the majority voice, where most of your neighbors were Hindu and many of them Muslim? What would it mean to be a Christian there? And who was Jesus in this world that would be so entirely not steeped in a Western philosophy and understanding of Jesus? Would there be a difference in how his message, his life, his death, and resurrection was understood? So with only one carry-on bag and a backpack, which included a great deal of mosquito repellent, she said goodbye to those she loved, and she headed off to India. Her guide, Leslie, would be her constant companion on this journey. He had so graciously planned a trip for her that was beyond anything she could have imagined for herself. Of course, she spent time seeing churches and temples all throughout southern India. She visited the countryside and the rich agricultural regions where tea and spices and fruit grew in astonishing abundance. She rode an elephant. She nicknamed the elephant Jenny because it was impossible for her to pronounce her real name. She found out that Jenny was 47 years old, absolutely in the prime of her life. And Jenny was absolutely spectacular. The woman talked with Jenny the whole time she rode her, telling her that she was beautiful and so graceful and so grounded, and that she was sure there was much going on in Jenny's head that no human companions would ever know about. She told Jenny that back home at her church, they had put an elephant in the nativity. While she could not be sure, she felt in her whole heart that Jenny seemed pleased. Now, while she was traveling, the woman also saw rice paddies that were dried in the hot sun for complete lack of water. This would be devastating to the economy as well as the food source of so many people. She would quickly come to appreciate how precious water was, and she would use it ever so sparingly. She would learn to use the water from the bucket that she bathed in and washed clothes in to flush the toilet. She would use the few drops of water from her bottled water to brush her teeth and rinse her mouth, not wanting to waste any down the drain. And when she returned from her travels, she would vow that she would use even less water than she had been trying to use all along in America, this land of abundance and excess. She spent a lot of wonderful hours giving talks, little lectures, leading little seminars and little discussion groups in seminaries and even in a public college. She talked with students and faculty who welcomed a chance for conversation about religion and interfaith concerns in talking with somebody from America. She was treated with a great deal of respect, and she was shown amazing hospitality. Never in her life has she had so much tea with milk and sugar. It was all very fun and very informative, and almost always people wished that there was more time in these spaces. So she invited people who were so inclined to friend her on Facebook, and she came back to find some new friends waiting. She and her guide Leslie traveled mostly by private car with a professional driver. The roads of India were an experience all their own. Except in the very largest cities where there were some traffic lights and a few traffic controls, India's roads were something of a nightmare, shared by buses, trucks, cars, motorcycles, scooters with entire families sitting on them, including infants. There was room on the road always made for authentic sacred cows, for goats, for dogs, for cats and monkeys, for pedestrians, and there were no crosswalks, and even the occasional working elephant. It was pretty scary, especially because so often there was a car or vehicle headed straight for you. It seemed to her that the lines on the road were suggestions rather than actual rules to be abided by. And there was so much honking, constant honking. And yet she gradually began to understand that this honking was not everybody being mad at everybody on the road the way people used horns in America. It wasn't random. Horns were actually saying things. I am passing you on the right. I am passing you on the left. I am coming around a blind corner. I hope you know I'm here. I am behind you and driving faster than you. I am stuck between cars. You may not see me, and I have to come over in front of you. I am moving in front of you even if you are not ready. The challenge was that all of the messages sounded somewhat the same. But eventually she figured out that, seriously, nobody wanted to die on the roads. And she found she could actually relax and enjoy the sights and sounds all around her as she traveled. She made a vow, though, never again to complain about the behavior of drivers back home at the corner of Eagle and Fairview, where she used to think traffic was simply awful. She rode night trains several times. It made her realize that home could be any place. If you could rest a little, if you could feel safe, if your tummy had a little food in it, and you had a few worldly possessions nearby, you could be at home anywhere. She understood herself to be far more adaptable than she thought possible because she knew she was actually a very privileged, spoiled person. She began to appreciate simple things so very much. At the end of her travels, she had several days to rest and study at 2 ashrams in the heart of South India. Here she found it very easy to adapt and make a little home for herself. She would be living each day at Ananda Ashram, run by a group of nuns who were sincerely the loveliest women she had ever met. Directly across the road would be Shantivanam, and she would go there to study and have prayers, Shantivanam being run by Catholic priests. Both retreat centers had a deep and beautiful history of teaching and trying to live the Eastern understanding of Jesus. The founder of Shantivanam was Father Bede Griffith, who died in the 1990s. He is revered in India amongst many, many Christians in the same way the Dalai Lama might be revered by those who follow his teachings. He had a profoundly open heart. He was a very wise person, and he spent his time understanding that the message of Jesus was not so much about being Christian as it was about how you behaved towards everyone around you. And he saw many, many intersections between Hinduism, the primary Eastern religion, and the life of Jesus. This became his teaching, and he was followed faithfully until his death. He's buried at the ashram. You can see his grave there, and his hut is a holy memorial to him as well. One of his disciples, Brother John Martin Sanajanda, would continue to write and teach in this tradition. Well, he was teaching there, and this woman had followed his teachings at home and read some of his writing, and so every day she would go and spend time in study with Brother Martin, satisfied a very deep place in her soul, as did the days of silence and contemplation at her little hut, which was truly home in those last days. She could sit on the porch in silence and watch countless butterflies in the meadow outside her door. She would try to take pictures of the peacock who frequented that meadow. She would wave at neighbors who moved their cattle morning and evening on a path just outside the ashram. She marveled at the flowers that were in bloom in such abundance. It was a wonderful way to end her trip, and she pondered, what would she say when she got home? What would she want people to know first? What would be the thing that she would say first when she arrived home? Eventually, this is what came to her. Standing here this morning, I want you to know that the church, that Jesus, that Christianity is alive and well halfway around the world in India. And I want you to know that Christianity is also fractured and complicated theologically there, just as it is here. There are different denominations. There are different historical origins. There is more Eastern and more Western understandings of Jesus, but there is one big difference. Because Christianity is truly a minority faith in India, people choose to be Christian. It's not just a supposition. It's not just kind of what everybody's doing. They choose it or they don't choose it. The Indian government actually asks you to register if you choose to be baptized. Now, not everybody does the registration, but that tells you something about the climate, about the little bit of suspicion about what Christianity might be doing in undermining or somehow changing a very much Hindu majority country. I did talk to Christians, many Christians, for whom their faith goes back several generations. But I also talked to lots of people who have chosen to follow Jesus coming from Hindu or Muslim backgrounds, and that Jesus is flavored by their history. India is not a place where the kind of evangelical zeal we see and hear around us here is welcome. There are even sort of Pentecostal tent meetings that happen there. But the faith seems to be spread most, and I can't emphasize this enough, through the acts of kindness and justice that are initiated by Christians in churches, in seminaries, and as individuals on behalf of those who struggle most. And you don't have to be in India for 5 minutes before you realize what incredible struggle there is for so many people there, how low and challenging the standard of living is. So as progressive Christians here, and that's what we are, in a not-so-progressive state, in a Western understanding of Jesus that is not so progressive as well, I think there is a lesson that we can take from our brothers and sisters in India as a starting point from my travels. we can recognize that we sitting here are actually a minority. And we can behave accordingly, recognizing that we are consciously choosing to follow Jesus as we understand Jesus, knowing that our behavior is going to speak a truth about Jesus that maybe sometimes gets lost in the judgmental, more fear-inducing voices of so many Christians around us. I wonder if we can do our very best to behave as the Father did to both of the sons in the parable that Jesus told. He spoke with love and care and clarity, without any judgment or threat of punishment. He acted with great love and care and clarity, and he reached out to both of them, wanted them to reach out to each other. This is, in India, how I think Christ is best understood, at least as I saw it lived and as I listened to people. This is a lesson in what it means, I think, to be a non-violent follower of Jesus. Our message being our behavior, our language not full of judgment or threat of punishment or reason to fear, simply loving our brothers and our sisters. And as we do this, we begin to discover that we don't have to be worried either about being judged or creating anger from God or being punished. We can live without fear, knowing that we are known and loved by God as we are. If we can open ourselves to loving and listening and connecting to our brothers and sisters, when we do this, I think we are leaving home. And when we leave home, God always runs to meet us wherever we are and invites us and all we bring back with us to share in the family, in the home, together here. We can again and again leave home and return home. We can again and again be brothers and sisters to each other, sharing what we discover in the world around us. Oh, I hope that is so for us. Amen.